Sly Cooper Thieves in Time is baffling to me. It's such a misguided project that you wonder how it even got off the ground. On the surface, it's your typical Sly Cooper adventure. Sneaking, punching, and heisting. It tries its best to follow the beat of its predecessors, even following up on the ending hook it left behind. But look even a little closer, and the illusion completely shatters. In the sea of mascot platformers that were slowly being phased out of the PlayStation brand, Sly Cooper had a magnetizing quality. It took me until the PS3 to get my hands on Ratchet, and even later to try out Jack. Had my hands on a couple of Crash games at some point, but the one trilogy I would never forget was the one with the slick raccoon thief and his partners in crime. I suppose there simply wasn't anything else like it. It had a maturity to it that I hadn't seen in a lot of other games. People got hurt, locked up, some of them died. We were a band of criminals on the run from the law, squaring up against terrifying threats. One wrong move, one tap of the sprint button too many, and we were toast. Sly 2 gave me nightmares. I still don't know how I got past Prague. It was electrifying while it lasted. Sly 4 is electrifying in the same way a taser might be. It's a brutal shock to the system that genuinely makes you wonder whether anyone making it even knew what Sly was. Playing it again recently got me thinking about how it ended up this way. How did one of the best trilogies on the PlayStation get a follow-up like this? What does it tell us about the legacy of a franchise? How it can trade creative hands, become something else entirely? One thing's for certain, Sly 4 missed the mark, and I think that's interesting.
Funny how things work out sometimes.
Right. I think some context is in order. Sly Cooper was a series of stealth action platformers on the PlayStation 2, created by Sucker Punch, the studio responsible for Ghost of Tsushima. It starred a dashing thief backed up by his two friends, a tech-savvy turtle named Bentley and a macho hippo named Murray. Sorry, the Murray. Wouldn't want to get that one wrong. Together, you traveled the world, stealing from other infamous criminals, with the adventure structured like a cartoon. Each episode saw Sly and the gang completing a series of missions, which all led up to an encounter with the episode boss. The whole aesthetic drive of Sly is comic adjacent, with animated stills in between chapters, exaggerated sound effects, and a cel-shaded graphical style. Utilizing this approach, Sly was able to carve out a respectable niche for itself, standing alongside its more graphically capable brothers. Dialogue had a clever wit to it, with some great voice talent to make for a very quotable series of games.
No, Sly, I'm the wizard, and you're sitting duck.
I read you loud and clear, lizard.
All this while tackling themes of legacy and brotherhood. It made for a series of unforgettable heists, and a damn near perfect ending. After Sucker Punch left the series to pursue new projects, Sanzaru Games would eventually try their hand at a new Sly game. Sly Cooper Thieves in Time is that shot. And as I mentioned before, it seems like your average Sly game on paper. Animated cutscenes, episodic structure fit with title splashes, a series of missions, and a heist at the end. It has dialogue. You run around, do occasional platforming, sneak around guards, pickpocket some treasure. Anybody could look at this from a distance and tell you it was Sly Cooper. Alas, the devil is always in the details. The Sly trilogy was dead set on leaving a strong impression. The first game opens on Sly, draped in darkness, sliding his way through the Paris rooftops. We're dropped in mid-heist with no information, as Sly scans his environment, beckoning the player to see what happens next. It's a fantastic way to get us acquainted with what we'll be in for, both thematically and mechanically. You sneak into the police station through the air vents, jumping around security lasers like an acrobat, sidling against the wall to make it into Carmelita's office. After you steal what you came here for, she chases you through the streets of Paris until you link up with the team and hightail it out of there, setting the tone for an adventure you'll be spending on a knife's edge. Sly 4 opens with the gang bouncing around a time vortex while a crazy main theme plays. Whoa, Sly Cooper, Thieves in Time. Quite the tonal shift, to say the least. The game drops straight into the animated intro, explaining how Sly, Bentley, and Murray fell back in together. It is quite possibly the most boring way you could open a game like this. It sounds like a silly complaint, but you have to understand, Sly was a meticulously crafted story. Almost every creative decision Sucker Punch made was purposeful. Sly 2's opening was able to establish the three main characters' roles: Thief, Brains, Brawn, what they're looking for, the clockwork parts, and the opposition they'll be up against, Interpol and the Claw Gang, all before filling in the little details afterwards. It's even more confusing seeing as there was an 8-year gap between Sly 3 and 4. You'd figure that opening on the heist itself would build even more intrigue. Why are the gang back together? Why are they in Paris? Why is Carmelita here? Then bang, you end with the gang punching it through a time portal. Instead, this opening is left feeling like somewhat of a formality. This is the thing that's in every Sly game, where you play as all the characters and learn what their abilities are. It has the veneer of past stylish intros, cloaking our gang in shadow, giving them cool text intros. It clearly wants to be like the intros of the trilogy, but it doesn't really understand why they packed their punch. In the case of Sly 4, you do this because you have to, not because you want to. One of the reasons the opening might be structured this way is due to the answers it gives being extremely unsatisfying. We last left these characters in a fairly conclusive place. Murray made a name for himself on the racetrack, Bentley and Penelope were working on a time machine together, and Sly feigned amnesia to give up his life of crime and pursue a future with Carmelita. He gave his cane and family fortune to his friends. It was a pretty final gesture. You'd have to wonder what would get him back into that life, away from Carmelita. It'd have to be something big, something personal.
But as time went on, the old itch came back, and I knew I needed to pull a heist.
The old itch, huh? Yeah, Sly just decides he's gonna break bad again. He's bored of the new life he chose to create for himself. It's unfortunate they went with this angle since they already have a reasonable dilemma with the Cooper lineage being erased from time. In order to stop himself from being erased, he'd have to take up the cane once more to save his ancestors. Instead of giving this the focus it deserves, Sly has to do something incredibly out of character so they can give him and Carmelita contrived relationship drama. It's like a poor man's Uncharted 4. Ah yeah, she's the ex-girlfriend now, watch out. Pretty messed up to relegate her to this when she was always a rogue force. There'd be many chapters where she'd wander around as a third party, bagging criminals. She led an army against Dr. M. She deserves to be more than simply the object of Sly's affection. Not like he really deserves her anyway after what he says to her.
Hey, Carmelita! Oh, funny meeting you here.
Sir, don't you love this woman?
I'll call you.
This one's gonna be a doozy, isn't it? I love the road trip energy the Sly games have. One chapter you're in Paris, sizing up a nightclub, looking to steal from a failed artist. The next, you're in India, nabbing yourself a tux and dancing with Carmelita on the ballroom floor. Each chapter had a totally different look and feel, and I was always excited to see where the gang was headed next. Time travel is theoretically a really cool way to take this concept to the next level, pulling a Back to the Future with the team van and seeing which time periods we end up in. Our first destination is feudal Japan, 1603 AD, supposedly a reference to the cinematic masterpiece Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, inspired by the greats. Our first mission is an expected one. Scope out the area and take some pictures on your binocular. Bentley needs recon photos to formulate a plan of attack, in this case to figure out how to break Ryuichi Cooper out of jail, one of Sly's legendary ancestors. Alright, so we're ready to get down to business.
These guards look like real bruisers.
And real ugly, too. That was definitely not his best side.
Oh, Sly, that wisecracker.
I really don't like the look of that place.
Something tells me the inside looks even worse.
Sly, you might want to keep it down. You're on a stealth mission.
That might be the largest gate I've ever seen.
The thief in me just needs to know what's behind it.
Sly's a thief. Thanks for reminding me.
I love sushi.
Okay. Sly 4 is the person in the room who can't stand awkward silences and blurts out anything that comes to mind just to stave off the social anxiety. Most of the time, they interject to tell you nothing of value, usually some insufferable joke. It's not a practice I'm particularly fond of in most games, but for Sly Cooper it is especially ill-fitting. The trilogy only had Sly speaking to Bentley when he absolutely needed to, and he made an effort to speak with a hushed tone when on call. While Bentley speaks normally from the safety of his hideout, Sly has to cut to the chase in case any of the guards happen to be roaming around. I think this is partly why Sly in particular is so insanely quotable. It felt like he had to choose his words carefully.
Make your way to this position, and I'll give you a full briefing on our objective.
I'm on my way.
In Sly 4, he'll just dump his brain on the table intermittently.
The trick is going to be finding some quality wood, leather, and metal.
Sure. Anything else you want me to pick up while I'm out? Eggs, milk, maybe some wax for your shell.
What kind of master thief acts like this on the job?
Otherwise, they'll throw you in with the common criminals.
Ugh, you mean like jaywalkers and litter bugs? Not gonna happen.
It's like he physically cannot help himself. Now, it's not like Sly was serious business at all times. He'd take the piss every now and then.
Unfortunately, it's frozen deep in an ice wall.
How are we supposed to get to it? Wait for more global warming?
But he knew when to shut up. He took interest in the plan, and on several occasions, he'd have Bentley explain something he didn't understand. He looked forward to these talks as they had a natural chemistry with each other. Sly 4's formula is that Bentley says something, Sly makes a bad joke about it, and Bentley tells him to knock it off. Every single time. I'd tell you to make a drinking game out of it if I didn't fear for your safety. Sly is all about the connective tissue that threads each job together. Some of the trilogy's best moments were random exchanges you'd hear in otherwise underwhelming missions mechanically. You'd be asked to repeat a simple button combination to get a guard relieved of his post, but it was what happened after that made the mission so memorable.
Any problems with that guy?
Said he wanted to be buried in his mom's pasta sauce.
Yeah. That's strange.
There were many points at which the trilogy simply asked you to go along with the ride, as it were. Going along with the ride in Sly 4 is exhausting because you don't want to hear what anyone has to say. All you're left with is this mission where you put on a costume, slowly walk past some guards, and do basic jumps over to Ryoichi. I mean, let's take a peek at the heist we're building up to. We need to stop El Jefe from removing Ryoichi from history, and to do that, we're going to put the guards to sleep with his sushi, deflect some fireballs, open up a giant gate, distract some guards, open up another giant gate, and then... Actually, I'm not sure what's supposed to happen at this point.
Once we get that gate open, there's nothing stopping us from taking the palace and putting El Jefe in his place. Viva la revolucion!
So I guess the plan is to open the gates and take the castle. In order to make that happen, Murray has to put on a geisha costume and dance in front of the guards to arouse them. There is apparently no other way to get information out of El Jefe, as he only comes out of the castle to talk to Madame Geisha. It is also heavily implied the two are romantically involved, meaning that shortly after this scene, the two probably spent the evening together. He probably would have figured out the ruse here. Is this a smart enough plan to justify a nearly 4-minute long dance sequence where several guards ogle Murray, all so that the gang can open 2 gates and then do what exactly? The problem with this setup is that it doesn't seem like there was a coherent vision for it. While the missions are technically going somewhere, preparing you for something, it doesn't even feel like they had a strong enough plan for what that thing was going to be. Bentley can't get farther than open the second gate in his briefing. The final missions are usually the best part, where everything you've done culminates in an explosive climax. That doesn't happen here, since you stroll in, beat up some guards, sneak under a bridge, open a gate, and then Sly starts fighting El Jefe. How exactly did they plan to prevent him from disturbing history? Beat him up and then what? He's still around. Are you gonna deliver him back to the present, gift-wrapped for Carmelita? The trilogy had an explanation for every single mission we were on. In the original game, you were going after the Fiendish Five to get back the stolen pages of the Thievius Raccoonus. In Sly 2, you were stealing back the clockwork parts from the Claw Gang. And in Sly 3, you were recruiting a group of specialists to break into the Cooper Vault. I have no clue what the goal is half the time in Sly 4. Presumably, the time stream is screwed up when Sly's ancestors are put in prison, so you'd think releasing them would help stabilize it. Except, there are villains from the present lingering around, causing more trouble, so I guess we have to go deal with them too. Yet, there's absolutely no problem telling the ancestors that Sly is a descendant of theirs. Certainly won't cause any damage to time by doing that. You don't feel like you're part of this elaborate scheme to get one over on a heinous villain. It feels more like you're on a tour of the timeline. It's difficult to have meaningful stakes when the gang can do whatever they want without consequence. Think about this. The way that they even got to this time period was by stealing an artifact from that time period. Harmless enough, it gives the gang an excuse to do a modern-day heist again. But how do they get to the next time period? They need an item, right? Well, after Sly beats El Jefe, a mysterious blimp comes by and carts him away. As it's flying away, one of the guards drops an item, one that just so happens to be from the Wild West in 1884 AD, where the next Sly ancestor is. Yeah, when I saw a plot-crucial item for time travel literally drop out of the sky, I started to ask some questions. What confuses me is that I wouldn't even say the Sly games are all that complicated. The Black Chateau is all about breaking into Dimitri's nightclub to steal the clockwork tail feathers, which he's using to print money. To prepare for this heist, you have Sly adjust some communication arrays so Bentley can hack into Dimitri's communications. Afterwards, Sly breaks into the nightclub to take some recon photos directly at the source of Dimitri's operation. Thanks to these efforts, Bentley is able to intercept an email which clues him into Dimitri's whereabouts and how to coax him out of hiding. By tailing him, Sly is able to watch him input the code to the water pump, which Murray is then able to destroy. This is a vital step for the heist so that Bentley can later sabotage the rerouted water pump, which will summon a repair truck, which they can then use to yank the nightclub's peacock sign off of the building, creating an opening to the pump room where the tail feathers are located. They're able to do this thanks to Bentley's efforts in loosening the peacock from its moorings in a previous mission. Every mission worked into the next until the heist at the end brought everything together. They achieved all of this while building chemistry between Sly and Neela, showing how nervous Bentley is on his first field mission, and introducing one of the series' most iconic antagonists. What made Sly so exceptional was how well planned it all was. As the gang made their way to the Wild West, I couldn't help but wonder, what is Sly 4's plan? Sly had style. Every animated cutscene was a delight to watch, a cross between cartoon and graphic novel that helped to thread the project together visually. These characters felt like they were jumping out of the pages of a comic book. Without lead artist Dev Madan, Sanzaru had a bit of an uphill battle in this regard. His touch would be the first thing anyone ever saw, featured prominently on the front of the box. There's some big shoes to fill. Unfortunately, they remain empty. Sly 4's animated cutscenes are fully animated, which is a big misfire. Madan's work was very expressive, his environmental shots were insanely well detailed, and the life he brought to each of the characters goes without saying. It made sense to give them minimal movement, emulating the kind of subtle stretches you'd imagine while reading a comic strip. There's simply no comparison here. The animated cutscenes are jarringly out of place. The characters look completely different. They're in full motion, which makes it look more like a Saturday morning cartoon. With the more exaggerated voice direction and in-your-face comedy writing, this is probably what they were going for too, which is a misread if I've ever seen one. It's like an inversion of the trilogy, where the in-game models and animations are a step up, but the animated cutscenes drag the whole style down, which I'd say is a pretty significant problem when that was the entire reason the original game stood out to begin with. The PS3 era had a ton of titles pushing the graphical envelope. What was Sly 4 doing to stand on its own, other than looking about as good as any other title released at the time? I suppose that's the question of the hour. How does Sly 4 stand out? What is it that we get to do in the Old West? A lot of platforming. Sly started out as more of a platformer, with linear levels that presented much more of a challenge than the later entries. It's probably the only Sly game I'd say is traditionally fun to play on its own merits. Sly 2 and 3 are excellent, but their strengths lie in the whole picture, and this is the template Sly 4 follows. It's generous to call what you do here platforming, as all it really amounts to is jumping and pressing the circle button. Any enemies you end up fighting are much the same. You might have a couple of extra moves to unlock on ThiefNet, but all you end up doing is mashing a couple of basic attacks. If you're not doing that, you're running around the open world defacing posters or tailing someone. It is aggressively non-interactive. They are built to be tools for a narrative that isn't exactly pulling its weight. Here in the Wild West, we meet Tennessee Kid Cooper, a famous outlaw. He has a gun built into his cane, which means you get some third-person shooting alongside your brain-dead platforming. Most of the time, it's you ducking in and out of cover as these health sponge guards eat up what remains of your lifespan, but occasionally you'll get to use a bullet time mode. I do sorta like how he plays, and it makes me wish the whole thing was more mechanically focused on Sly's ancestors. Imagine an entire chapter with the level design and structure of Sly 1, but with Tennessee Kid Cooper, an anthology title exploring this legendary lineage. Instead, we run around tailing Toothpick or getting stuck in a turret section. Most of the time, I don't even know what the impetus is for these minigames. You play Diner Dash for a bit to put the guards to sleep, except you come in from the window anyway and stick to the rafters, so it feels like they dropped this in here for no reason. The heist is aboard a train. Gee, where have I seen that one before? To board the train, you need to beat Toothpick's most loyal henchmen in a bunch of random competitions, after which they just give you the key. Basically, it's an opportunity to shove in whatever kind of random filler the devs wanted. Murray beats some people up, check. Sly does a race with the ball and chain costume, check. Target practice with Carmelita, check. I can't discern what these missions are supposed to add. The Lumberjack games were silly. The plan for them didn't make a lot of sense, so the natural result was that the Cooper gang failed. They were captured, had all their clockwork parts stolen, and had to make a last-minute mad dash to Arpeggio's blimp before it flew away. You could say the whole episode was a build-up to that failure, even the sillier moments. It felt like the gang getting a little carried away, underestimating Jean Besson, treating him like some idiot after the high they had following their train heist. Turns out, he wouldn't be fooled twice. Toothpick is a joke compared to him. The missions you complete to take him down reveal how pathetic he is. He was a 2-bit gangster who liked gold and cowboy movies. That's it. I don't get the sense you're supposed to take him very seriously, what with him talking about what birthday cake he wants over the prison intercom.
Tomorrow ain't my birthday, but I do not care. I want the cake anyway.
I'll just stay right here and lend you my moral support.
Chocolate cake with the candles and the frosting and lots of sprinkly things.
Or the fact that stealing his lollipop is enough for him to come throw you in solitary. You never understand what made him such a successful gangster. His only threatening moment is shooting one of his henchmen. Otherwise, he walks around gleefully talking about how much he likes to stare at his gold. It doesn't help that he's allowed to get away with some crazy shit, like capturing the Cooper gang, who are inexplicably all hanging out in the same spot with the team van. Sly and Murray suffered a massive betrayal by Neela at their lowest moment, having spent all their energy fighting Rajan. That was what it took to put them in prison. I guess Toothpick can come up here with 2 guards though, and they'll surrender immediately. Also, Tennessee and Carmelita can spend some quality time together to do another jailbreak. Play Sly 4 long enough, and you really begin to question what you're even doing. Are we making any progress against Toothpick? Has what we've done meant anything at all? You spend the whole episode grappling with questions like this, while Carmelita gets really mad at Sly and a love triangle forms with his ancestor. Not only does Carmelita appear seemingly out of nowhere, she also essentially only shows up to yell at Sly and immediately hook up with one of his relatives. This is some Disney Channel shit. What about the timeline? Why is Sly not apologizing? Why does he insist on being such an asshole? He was never like this. Who am I even following at this point? It's hard to get excited to play as Carmelita again when this is simply not the same character. All she ever talks about is how upset she is at Sly. You think she'd also care about bagging criminals, but I guess the law takes a backseat to whatever's going on in her love life. They don't feel like 2 individuals with chemistry. They seem to be solely defined by the fact that they are in a relationship. As if you were to only know that Sly 3 ended with them together and nothing else. I mean, hell, I always thought Carmelita knew Sly was lying, but recognized his desire to give up a life of crime and spend his life with her. That's always been a personal interpretation, and it's probably wrong, but that's just it. Their relationship was layered enough to allow for reads like that. That's how real they felt to me, even as a kid. You had Bentley, just for a moment, questioning Sly because of what Dr. M told him. They'd been friends for years, brothers even, but still Dr. M gave him pause for thought. Was Sly hogging all the credit? Did he even really care about them? It took a single line from Murray, of all people, to make Bentley realize how wrong he was. The Brawn wasn't just there to beat up the bad guys, he was a real character, with thoughts and feelings about the situation they found themselves in. Can you say that about Sly 4? Where are the genuine interactions? Carmelita was the type of character to smirk at Sly after he tricked her with a bottle of wine. These two had a playful banter even when they were on opposite sides of the law, so why does their relationship immediately devolve into middle school drama? You get the sense that there was an understanding here of what happened in the trilogy, in a broad sense. There are references to characters like the Contessa or Sly's bad Italian accent. It's clear that Sanzaru did their research, but the end result makes it feel so surface level. The impression you'd get from these characters at a glance is how they ended up characterizing them, as if Sly is solely defined by cracking jokes, to the point where everyone cowers in fear when he breaks out his Italian accent.
I'm gonna use my
No, Sly, don't say it!
Italian accent!
I said crazy, Sly, not suicidal.
Or that Murray is only there to beat people up and that he has nothing else to offer besides talking about how much he likes to eat. When you were playing as Bentley in Sly 2, his missions weren't anything unlike what you'd see in Sly 4. You did a lot of hacking. That happens all the time in Sly 4 because Bentley's the brains, right? He hacks stuff. Let's make 3 different hacking minigames to justify why he does it so much. Except they don't have the spice added when Bentley was hacking on his own, when he had to prove to himself and his team that he was capable of handling himself. These missions were integral parts of these characters' journeys, and that's why they were so satisfying to complete. That's why I loved seeing those mission complete splash pages. You finish the train heist of episode 2, and what are you meant to feel? You rob Toothpick, Tennessee gets his gold, and you suffer through a really long boss fight where you mostly watch Toothpick jump around while you wait for an opening. You barely remember anything you just did to reach this point. Toothpick is a horrible character, and the climax doesn't mean anything. It's just another job. Sly's ancestral legacy meant a lot to him. It shaped how he viewed the world. It was where he learned all of his skills, and living up to their legacy was a big theme of the ultimate conclusion. They're a very important part of the series, and so it's natural that a time-traveling premise would make use of them in some way. Here we are in 10,000 BC, because while the van was plummeting to its destruction, someone pulled an item out of thin air that came from this time period, which just so happens to be where one of Sly's ancestors is, and also where another villain from the present was posted. Lovely. Alright then, which of Sly's legendary ancestors are we meeting next? Well, this is actually the progenitor of the Cooper clan, an unintelligible caveman who we name Bob. I would love to tell you more about Bob, but I don't think I am physically capable of doing so. I have no clue who this person is, what he wants, what his goals are. He's a fucking caveman! Of all the ancestors they could pull from, Slight and Common, Slay, Henriette, Thaddeus, they decided to create one of their own, and as expected from that lovely prospect, I wouldn't even say that we ended up with a character. He's a caveman who speaks funny like the Guru. His special ability is that he can climb walls really slowly. Cool. And I liked this better when Sonic did it personally. This genuinely upsets me. The prospect of getting to meet Sly's ancestors is awesome. You want to be able to see what all of them were like in their prime, how they'd compare to Sly, and what kind of insight he'd be able to gain by meeting all these legends. Would they live up to their name, or let their humanity show? Unfortunately, you don't get a sense of who they are beyond the pages of the Thievius Raccoonus. Ryoichi is an honorable ninja who also makes sushi. That is his entire character. Tennessee Kid is an outlaw who calls people jackalopes. That is his entire character. It's the same for Galeth, it's the same for Salim, and it is definitely the same for Bob. It's clear that these characters were never originally intended to be more than words in a book. They were all based on famous historical figures throughout time and served merely to motivate Sly's story. There aren't even characters here to ruin, and they still feel like a misinterpretation. The ancestors only get 1 or 2 missions, meaning they get less screen time than the main gang. When all you're writing for them in their brief appearances are bad jokes, all you can really focus on is what they offer on a gameplay front. You get to perform the tricks spoken about in the Thievius Raccoonus. There's a novelty to that, but it comes at the expense of these figures never really coming into their own. You'd expect at least one of them to be hesitant of these time travelers, but they all more or less readily ingratiate themselves into the group, ready to perform missions for Bentley. Because they are legends sprung directly from the pages of their family book, they don't have conflicts of their own to grapple with, and all of the villains they go up against are time travelers from the modern day, which means there's no one to bounce off of them, no enemy force to tell us what these characters were really like. Though, I guess it isn't as if Bob over here was ever going to actually be anyone. He wants to go steal an egg from a dinosaur, but in order to do that, Murray has to whip him back into shape. It's a weird episode, since you still have a villain, but you also need to put the van back together. I think it's meant to be the gang's low point, where they're stuck in 10,000 BC and have to escape. Unfortunately, this is an incredibly boring premise for a series of missions. Most of what you end up doing here builds up to nothing in particular. After the Grizz stole Bob's cane and eggs, he fell into a depressive slump and is now out of shape. Murray does a rocky training montage with him that lasts an eternity and sparks a character arc. Let's talk about Murray. In the first game, he was a bit more of a goof, stuck in Sly's shadow. He was there to drive the van and needed help to carry out missions. It was surprising to see him crash onto the scene in Sly 2 with so much gusto, solidifying his spot as the Brawn. His fight against Rajan was a solid showcase of what he brought to the team. When Sly and Bentley hit a wall, he'd be there to break it down. But that wasn't all he was. He loved the van, and it hit him hard when he had to abandon it. He'd move heaven and earth to get it back, which was exactly what he did in Sly 3 when they found it again. Despite what everyone told him, he was not going to leave his baby behind. Never again. It ties into some of his insecurities. In his eyes, he was the reason Bentley was injured. He was the reason his best friend would never be able to walk again. He took it really hard. He went on a spiritual journey to find himself, to reckon with the pain he was feeling, put some good out into the world, and rectify that failure. He tried to discard the part of himself that he didn't feel was strong enough, only to double back on that when his friend was in trouble once again. In being able to help Bentley this time, he was able to recognize that he did have a place on the team. What happened to Bentley wasn't his fault, and all he can really do is make sure nothing else like that happens again. To be the brawn that holds the gang together. I think this is partly why I've always found it apt that he's the one to keep Bentley from going down the same thought spiral Dr. M once did, to wake him up to the reality of the situation. Giving Murray a character arc where he loses confidence in his abilities after all that is a bit of a slap in the face. What is there for him to even struggle with at this point? He's completely confident in his abilities, was there to convince Bentley during his crisis of faith, and was smashing people up in Demolition Derby. He was more than capable in his own right, but for some reason, because another strong guy shows up, he starts to doubt his own capabilities? Where does this even come from? Murray can't climb a wall of ice, so he dives into this spine-chilling arc about how the team is neglecting his skills in favor of Bob.
You're gonna have to track down each piece to reassemble it.
I don't see what you're complaining about. I'm the one who's just a penguin herder now.
You can't just decide someone's gonna have a character arc, especially not the same arc they already went through. Bentley's arc in the original was about him coming out of his shell, as it were. He started as a techie, with a brief moment to shine at the end of Sly 1. Then, in Sly 2, he gradually became used to field missions, growing his confidence until he squared up against Jean Besson. Despite his injury, he kept that confidence going into Sly 3 and was more capable than ever before. Which is why, in Sly 3, his focus was more on finding himself and what made him truly unique, resulting in his beautiful relationship with Penelope. This didn't come out of nowhere, it was a carefully considered trajectory that made it so the Bentley you saw in the first cutscene of the trilogy and the last cutscene were like completely different people. If he were to suddenly regress, losing that confidence he'd built up for a reason as stupid as, I don't know, he can't climb a building, that would be ridiculous. But that's essentially what they do with Murray. Never mind the fact that Murray has never had a problem being different from his team. It doesn't matter that he's not as nimble as Sly or as smart as Bentley, because he's the strongest around. But because Murray in Sly 4 is a food-loving idiot, it almost feels like they had to give him something to focus on. Otherwise, why is he even here? Which is true enough, since when he isn't dressing up like a geisha or whining about wrangling penguins, I do tend to forget he exists. His dialogue is so juvenile, it hurts to read sometimes. They treat him like he's an infant they picked up off the street. Murray wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but you could still hold a conversation with the dude. I loved the talks he had with Sly, they always made me laugh.
My pleasure. You know how I love to mess around with Carmelita.
Yeah, that's weird.
This lack of autonomy makes the fight he has at the end even more laughable. He is so torn up about not contributing anything to the team anymore that he goes to fight the Grizz. The plot literally whisks him over, and the gang just kinda watches it happen. It has nothing to do with the heist, but it's Murray's moment to shine against the Grizz. And part of the reason it was cool when he fought Rajan was that it was Rajan? This menacing predator you'd cornered into the jungle, the one that catches you off guard, wounding Sly, this feral, cornered animal you were in the ring with. It was a fight for your life. It was thrilling. The Grizz is not a threatening character. His backstory might as well be a ripoff of Dimitri, which means he also has to act like him. He's a washed-up artist with a peculiar way of speaking, to say the least.
I'm tired of you Cooper chumps. The Paradox, everybody. All I ever really wanted to do is skate. That's right.
Wait, he was a graffiti artist. Sly described him as a street thug. He raps, too. So, this is supposed to be, and he's voiced by a white guy. Not only is he a racist caricature, he's not even remotely a threat, so having Murray be the one that needs to take him down is so contrived. He has to keep up with his ice skating skills, something no one else can do, clearly. After which, the gang spells the lesson out like we're watching an episode of Mickey Mouse Clubhouse.
Thanks, guys. I guess this makes up for all my screw-ups lately.
Murray, we all make mistakes. It happens. But it doesn't matter because we're a team. And we all have each other's backs. That's why we're unbeatable.
Yeah, what he said.
Once again, the build-up to all of it is practically non-existent. Halfway through the episode, because you're so focused on getting your time machine fixed, you then start to tail the Grizz and do some recon. By then, though, you've been here for too long, so Carmelita has to swoop in and give you all the information you need, completely invalidating almost everything you just did. So much wasted time tailing this beautiful character.
So I'm rolling, I'm flowing, so bad it ain't fair. The Grizz will teach the Paradox, don't mess with the bear.
Sly Cooper was never batting 100 when it came to stuff like this. You could argue characters like Ms. Ruby or the Panda King are a little insensitive, don't really know how Aboriginals would feel about the Guru, but at least they all have well-defined personalities. Not really in a position to know, but I imagine stuff like this would be easier to swallow if they at least felt like fully fleshed out characters. I don't know anyone that could look at the Grizz and say, yeah, that's a really good example of a black character. What even happened here? What did we accomplish or learn? What did we gain from this? I love Sly's rogues gallery. Like the Cooper gang, they're often rejected by society. They enter a life of crime or are shunned by the general populace, but have some character flaw that leads them to lash out. Don Octavio's passion was for the opera, and he was good at it. He had fans, they built him up as the next big legend. Before he knew it, though, times had changed. Musical interests had shifted, opera was out, and so was he. He joined up with the mafia to spread his hate across Venice. Some characters, like the Contessa, are pure evil. She married into a wealthy family, poisoned her husband, and took his belongings for herself. She developed her hypnotism for Interpol, interrogating thieves to figure out where they hid their loot, as she was also a thief herself, working for the Claw Gang in secret. Bentley put it best.
Inconceivable! She's no healthcare professional.
Whether these characters were sympathetic or not, you always understood them. General Sao was the worst of the worst, but still, you hated him, right? He had to have been written well enough for that to happen. We get to see him kidnap Jing King, force her into marriage, and make sexist remarks about her. He was a real piece of work, and it felt so good to ruin him.
She's a woman. She doesn't know up from down.
Sly 4 doesn't have a villain like that. Nowhere is there a baddie you'd love to take down, which is a big problem when every episode is supposed to revolve around them. The Black Knight seems to be the first one with an air of mystery to him. His guards are robots, he has a big metal suit. I have to admit, the first time I saw this dude, I was actually intrigued to find out what his deal was. He seemed somewhat threatening, and you spend most of the chapter without a clear backstory. We instead spend time rescuing Sir Galeth, playing around with the archery costume, and making use of his cane lance to vault into some balloons. Typical fare for a Sly episode, nothing super exciting. Something weird about Carmelita being around now is that she's forced into another love triangle, which makes Sly act like a huge dick towards Galeth.
Then you better get going before Sir Goof gets himself captured again.
Dude, I thought you idolized these people, but because Carmelita shows a hint of interest, you're gonna take it out on Galeth? Are you 5 years old? Oh well, whatever. The Black Knight. I want to see what this dude's all about.
This blasted suit is so hot. I need some air.
Much better. I can barely think in that thing.
It's not possible.
I see. Penelope. Alright. Okay, yeah, that tracks. I mean, it makes perfect sense. All you have to do is completely discard everything about her character. It's moments like this where I truly wonder if anyone writing this game even played Sly. I know they did. They keep reminding me. It's clearly a reference to Penelope's origins as the Black Baron, which was a big twist. Except there, it made perfect sense. Here, I have no clue how they even came up with it. Her stated reason for joining Le Paradox was that Bentley had become too honorable. If only they were willing to get their hands dirty a little more, make weapons for criminals, they'd be rich. She blames Sly for this, citing him as a bad influence. You know, the character she started out admiring, the one she kinda had a bit of a crush on, that Sly? Though I suppose in this alternate universe Sly 4 exists in, where Sly is a bumbling idiot joke machine, I may have to agree with her. If their goal was to make me speechless, then maybe they succeeded. I loved Penelope. She was a cute robotics geek, but she could also kick ass when the chips were down. Her fight against LaFouille was one of my favorite moments in Sly 3. This cannot be Penelope. It just can't. This isn't a situation where she had a change of heart, no. This implies she was evil from the beginning. For the other characters, it was easy to see why they were so different. You boil them down to a few one-note traits or gimmicks, write lame jokes for them, and you get shadows of their former selves. I can see how this happened. Penelope makes no sense. I cannot think of any explanation for this other than, wouldn't it be cool if we had a twist? Furthermore, it seems like yet another case of, we need to give Bentley something to do, so let's have Penelope betray him. He'll have a moment where he hides in his shell and the team will have to go on without him, but he'll come in at the very last moment to fight Penelope. Bros before hoes, am I right? Yeah, that's all well and good, except this isn't Penelope. This is some bizarro reflection of her, some dark timeline she fell down before meeting Bentley. This is not the girl we know from the end of Sly 3. That's a pretty big problem because this twist is the villain of the episode. If it doesn't work, the whole episode doesn't work. All of the missions are about stopping the Black Knight. He spends some time with Galeth, but as we've come to expect, it's Yuri Lowenthal doing his best impression of a chivalrous knight. Maybe he's a bit headstrong, gets himself into trouble, but that's about it. It's him and Penelope, and if you don't care for either of them, tough luck. You want a good twist? Have one of Sly's biggest enemies positioned as a crucial member for an upcoming job. Force them to work together, mine the drama which would inevitably come from that, use it to further deepen our understanding of the Panda King. This is a twist that has a purpose. It's as shocking as it is effective. It humanized the Panda King, making him more than a member of the Fiendish Five. You want an even better one? How about the chilling realization that, as you're learning about Sly's ancestors, it becomes clear that there's a shadowy figure in each of these pictures. There's a specter that's been haunting the Cooper line for generations, who ends up turning out to be Clockwork. It builds him up to be a menacing threat as it's revealed he turned himself into a machine to live forever, hunting the Coopers until their last breath. Penelope's villain arc removes depth from her, makes her even less of a character. The twist doesn't just add nothing, it takes something away. Genuinely sounds like an idea I'd come up with when I was 7 years old. Moments like these make me question what we're even doing here. What kind of story was Sanzaru trying to tell? How did this project come to be? Whose creative drive willed it into existence? What was the point of it all? If you were to ask me what my favorite Sly game was, it would probably be Sly 3. I'm a sucker for sick conclusions. Endings are usually where you're supposed to get huge payoffs, and the ending to a trilogy gets the opportunity to wrap up everything. It's likely why they also tend to be more divisive. Sly 3, for my money, has a killer ending that wraps up Sly's journey as a character as much as it does Sucker Punch's mark on the industry in the PS2 era. It comments on the power of legacy, how it has a hold over all of us, and how it's natural to want to break free. I dare say that Sly's greatest strength was its command over a powerful and clear set of themes, which are far more impactful to revisit as an adult. I ask then, what themes are present in Sly 4? Now that we're at the final chapter, I suppose it's time to ask the big boy questions. What is it attempting to say? I like to believe compelling art has a reason to exist, that it serves a purpose. The artist creates in order to convey a feeling or idea. We find meaning in the works that we're connected to because they have meaning. Perhaps it wasn't explicitly intended by those who made it, but it exists nonetheless. People loved the original trilogy because Sucker Punch had a unique vision they wished to share. We wanted to be a part of that, to go on a journey with that creation, to watch it grow and evolve. Glenn Egan, co-founder of Sanzaru Games, had this to say about the drive to create Sly 4.
We were kind of looking at what was going on with Sucker Punch. They were working on Infamous, and Infamous is super cool, huge, massive game, and we're like, I don't think they're going to have the time to make another Sly Cooper right now, and I really want to play another Sly Cooper game.
Sanzaru were fans of Sly, enough that they desperately wanted a new one to exist. They wanted to be the ones to continue that legacy. Sly 4 is the window through which we see firsthand what they loved about it, and it's nothing even close to what I saw in them. By the time you reach 40 Thieves, there's no more gas left in the tank. There's clearly no overarching vision for what Sly 4 was meant to be. Here we are, facing off against Miss Decibel. She was bad at music, someone threw a tomato at her, she can hypnotize people with the trumpet stuck up her nose. Brilliant, can't wait to stop her. Oh boy, what about the next ancestor? Salim Al-Kupar's defining character traits are that he's lazy and likes to eat.
Badass!
Le Paradox is a pale imitation of Dr. M, bent on revenge against the Coopers after Sly's dad stole the limelight from him. He's a spiteful skunk that Miss Decibel is romantically interested in, making me question whether anyone writing these characters has ever met a real woman. I don't know how else we end up with a crucial part of the heist being Carmelita doing a sexy belly dance to distract the guards.
I'm sorry I didn't ask, Carmelita, but you're the only one who can pull this off!
Once again, the central conflict revolves around something Sly's father did once upon a time. He committed the sin of stealing something that Le Paradox was going to steal. He didn't even appear to do it maliciously, he just sort of beat him to the punch. In Sly 3, we only get to hear about Sly's father through Dr. M's perspective. It's obviously a hate-filled, jealous point of view, but since we're not given any other eye through which to view it, we have to ask ourselves some questions about what their partnership was really like. Sly himself has to ask some questions about what his family's legacy really means. Has it only ever led to solitude and death? Would following in his family's footsteps continue the cycle of pain? Would it create another Dr. M? Most importantly, is this even a life he wants for himself? Or is he following in his family's footsteps because that's simply what's expected of him? What does happiness really mean to Sly? Does he even know? Sly 4 simply isn't interested in pointing to questions like this. It would rather revel in the series' history, parade around past events and memes that fans would recognize, while missing every conceivable aspect of what made them so lovable to begin with. Let me ask a question. Is this even Sly Cooper anymore? Sure, you're in a big hub. You get to run around as your favorite characters, stealing treasure. Pickpocketing guards is about as fun as it always was, and I'm even glad they decided to bring back clue bottles. It was a great way to encourage people to explore every inch of these lovingly crafted biomes. But if the characters you're playing no longer resemble the ones you fell in love with, if what they're doing doesn't make any sense, if you don't even want to hear them speak, why are we riding with them? I think this is why 40 Thieves is the most painful chapter. You're almost at the finish line, but you have so much left to slog through. More tailing missions, an RC copter mission, more hacking, a god-awful turret section, and the aforementioned violation of the Geneva Conventions. All the while, there's no conflict to wrestle with, no themes to interrogate. You just segue into an epilogue chapter where Bentley rounds up Sly's ancestors. What then does the final battle pay off? The battle against Dr. M had a crushing weight to it. Sly was facing off against the consequences of his family's legacy. He was paying for the alleged sins of his father. You had to hide under relics left behind, using them as shields to protect yourself against Dr. M's rampage. You really get the sense through this fight that the Cooper line is coming to an end. Sly's fight with Le Paradox is an anime QTE sword fight through the time stream where they sling insults written by a 5-year-old at each other, and then he steals Sly's paraglider and flies away. Oh boy, Sly's stranded in ancient Egypt, what are we to do? Did anybody earnestly want to make this? I don't mean that as some kind of insult, it is a genuine question. Let's make Sly 4 because the world deserves another Sly game is not a strong enough reason to create something. Yet, it's one that I once accepted. When I was younger, Sly 4 was really exciting. I remember reading this very interview and thinking, yes, exactly, the world needs more Sly Cooper. Our interests were aligned in that sense. I remember playing it and enjoying it. It was a new Sly Cooper game. How awesome was that? I never expected it to fade from my memory as swiftly as it did. Ironically, I think my desire to have more Sly betrayed what its appeal always was, that it was complete. Truthfully, if I want more Sly, all I have to do is go back and see him. He'll always be there. Too often, we don't even ask ourselves why we want something to return. What reason is there for Sly 4 to exist? Is it that Bentley talked about making a time machine? Is that reason enough to get a continuation? Is there something we have yet to understand about these characters? Something we want them to do that they haven't showcased yet? Is there a gameplay idea that feels like it hasn't reached its full potential? How could it go further than the trilogy did? Through asking for more, we take the thing we love for granted. It may as well be disposable. We're very greedy in that way. It's sad, really. The people who made Sly haven't even gone anywhere. They're still making games, but we don't want to follow those because they don't star a blue raccoon. It isn't exactly the thing we were fed decades ago, so what's the point in it existing? Which isn't even to say that loving Sly necessitates that you also love Infamous or Ghost of Tsushima. I think it's more so that asking for more's sake is damaging to our ability to assess why we fell in love with something to begin with. Franchises naturally play upon those questions we will continue to have about a world we're enraptured with. Sly 4 is the unsatisfying answer to all of those questions. It is the product of a need for something to continue beyond the point at which it had anything left to offer by a group of well-meaning fans who had nothing of substance to add. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall during its development. I'd love to see what questions came up and how they went about answering them. To do that, though, I guess I'd need to get my hands on an item from that era. I didn't make this video to turn Sanzaru games into a punching bag. I don't think they ruined my childhood or whatever. In fact, I think they did just the opposite. Through writing about and trying to understand Sly 4, I was able to reach a better understanding of what Sly meant to me. So much work went into making the Sly trilogy incredible, and that ought to be commended. I don't believe Sanzaru had what it took to follow that act. Who knows, perhaps someone else did. But hey, it was a tough act to follow.
That sneaky devil.